So this is our Snmp version 3 lab, where we are going to configure a feature that is known as Snmp support for VPNs, also known as context-based access control. Notice that we have this gigabit 4 that belongs to the global routing table, and we also have this gigabit 2 that belongs to VRF2 that is helping us provide services for our blue customer. And we also have gigabit 3 that belongs to VRF3 that is helping us provide services for our orange customer. So in this case, the blue customer wants to have access through SNMP to our device in order to gather information from gigabit 2 interface. The orange customer wants to do the same. It wants to gather statistics for gigabit 3 using SNMP through our device. So we could do this with traditional SNMP. However, there is a security constraint here. We want the blue customer to be able to read only VRF2 information. We don't want to let the blue customer to gather information from other customers, and we don't want this customer to be able to read information from a global routing table. In the same manner, for the orange customer, we want the orange customer to only be able to gather information from VRF number 3, but we want to avoid the case where this customer gathers information from a different customer or from the global routing table. This is where the SNMP support for VPNs, also known as context-based access control, kicks in. So this is what we are going to do in this lab. We are going to create a group 1 that will have user 1. This user 1 will have access to the whole device. It will be able to read this interface, and this interface information. Then for this blue customer, we are going to create a context for this particular customer that we're going to call context 2. We are going to create a view for this particular customer that we are going to call view 2. We are going to create group 2 that is going to bind these two configurations together, and we are going to create user 2 that we are going to assign to this customer, so this customer will only be able to gather information from VRF2. And finally, we are going to create a context that we are going to call context 3 for our orange customer. We are also going to create view 3 for this customer. We are going to create group 3 that is going to bind view 3 with context 3. And finally, we are going to create user 3 that is going to be the user that we are going to assign for this customer that will only have access to VRF3. Okay, let's start configuring this device. We are not running any SNMP agent yet because we have no configuration at all. So let's start with user 1 that will have complete access to the device. So let's just create a group. Let's call it group 1. It will be version 3. We are not going to configure any authentication at all, and we are just going to leave it at that. And then we are going to configure a user, SNMP server user 1 that belongs to group 1, version 3. If we issue show SNMP again, we can see that the agent is turned on, and we have one user and one group, which is group 1 that has the default view that is v1 default that gives us access to almost all of the object ID 3, and we have user 1 as well. Now let's create a context and a view for the VRF2 in order to enable SNMP support for VPNs. So we are going to issue SNMP server context, and we are going to create context 2 for the VRF2. Let's link it to the VRF. So let's go to VRF definition, VRF2, and within address family IPv4, we are going to issue SNMP context, context 2. Then we are going to create a view for this particular context. Let's call it view 2, and we are going to include the interfaces MIV to this view, included, and then we are going to create a group that is going to bind these two configurations together. So let's call this group number 2, that is going to be version 3, no authentication, no privacy, that is going to be linked to context 2, for reading view number 2. Finally, we are going to create a user for this group. Let's call this user 2, that this is going to belong to group 2, version 3. So we have that user created for context 2. Let's do the same for the other VRF. We are going to create a context for VRF3 that we are going to call context 3. Let's link it. VRF definition, VRF3, address family IPv4, SNMP context, context 3, and then we are going to create a view for this context, SNMP server view. In this case, it will be view 3, that is going to include this MIV only. And we are going to create a group in order to bind these two pieces of configurations together. We are going to call it group 3, version 3, no authentication, no privacy, context 3, and for reading view 3. And finally, we are going to create a user that we are going to call user 3, that is going to belong to group 3 for version 3. So we have these 3 user. User 1 will have access to the whole device. User 2 will have access to only the context number 2 that corresponds to VRF2. And user 3 will have access to context 3 that will only be able to retrieve information from VRF3. Let's see what is our IP address, because we need this IP address in order to test our config. So let's test the configuration now. Let's issue, for instance, SNMP walk with user 1. Remember that user 1 has complete access to the device for the interfaces MIV. So we'll see that it has access to all the interfaces. Let's change the user, and now let's use user 2 with context 2. This is the only that is changing. We are examining exactly the same MIV for the same IP address. And notice how this user 2 that belongs to group 2 that is linked to context 2 only can access information that belongs to VRF2. Now let's change the user for user 3 that corresponds to context 3, and see how this user 3 only has access to VRF3 information. So let's see user 2 again. So only interface gigabit Ethernet 2 is available to user 2, and for user 3 that belongs to context 3 only has access to gigabit 3, because gigabit 3 is the only interface that belongs to VRF3. So finally, let's see how the configuration looks like. So we have these context 2 and context 3 that are bound to VRF2 and VRF3. This is the view configuration. View 2 includes only the interfaces MIV. View 3 includes only the interfaces MIV as well. We have group 2 and group 3, and these are the users. Remember that user 1 has access to the whole device. User 2 only to the context, what context 2 and view 2 allow, and user 3 has access only to what context 3 and view 3 allow. So let's issue, for instance, show SNMP context, show SNMP view, This is view 2 and this is view 3. Show Snmp group and show Snmp user.